Moi everyone and welcome to Finnish Plate. Soups are a great way to keep yourself warm in the winter and they're a very easy way to feed a lot of people. You can make a small pot like this or you can make a large pot if you have a bigger crowd to feed. This particular soup over here in front of me is Finnish Hamburger soup and it has pieces of ground meat, pork and beef in this case. It has some root vegetables, potatoes, carrots, and some celeriac, some onions in there too, in a beefy broth with a couple of spices. It's a pretty simple soup, but it's definitely going to keep you warm and full, especially when you pair it with some Finnish rye bread. So join me and I'll show you how to make this Finnish soup. It's snowing right now in New York, so I figured I'll make some soup to keep warm before I go out there and clean my car off the snow. And of course, soups are a very big part of Finnish cuisine. Let's talk a little bit about the ingredients first, of course. Now, the soup is sometimes called hamburger soup, sometimes ground beef soup. And the name ground beef soup may be a little bit misleading sometimes because Finns love to have a mixture of pork and beef in many dishes. And here too I have a 50-50 mixture of ground pork and ground beef. You could of course use regular beef too, that's not a problem at all, but just know that pork is also a very common option here. Then we have our root vegetables. We have a celeriac, which is familiar from plenty other Finnish dishes. Wax turnip, again, an old familiar item. Some potatoes, some carrots, and of course an onion. And then we have also some roasted beef based bouillon here. You could use just regular stock just as well. Now first, of course, we have to prep the vegetables. We have to, of course, peel all of them and then dice them. Whether you want to keep them large pieces or smaller pieces, it's up to you, depending on your knife skills too. Just know that potatoes probably don't need quite as long as cook time as the others, but other than that, it really doesn't matter. Many people leave them in pretty big chunks, so that's completely up to you. Let me first peel my vegetables quickly. I'm using just whatever potatoes I had. I believe these are starchy potatoes that I used for mashed potatoes. But if you go out and get potatoes specifically for this dish, you may want to use a little bit waxier potato, red potatoes or something like that, just so that they will not fall apart when cooking. And I gotta be careful that mine don't either, which is why I'm gonna add my potatoes in and pretty much to the end of cooking. Other vegetables you could use here are parsnips. Parsnips are a very common addition to the soup. I just didn't happen to have any. These are just vegetables that I had in my pantry, so therefore they are great for a soup. Anyway, this dish is definitely something more about what do you happen to have in your pantry rather than going out and getting really fancy potatoes, getting the best ground sirloin that you may find in the store. The hamburger soup is a fairly common everyday lunch or dinner item in Finland. Not just in the winter time, but it is often served in schools and cafeterias, places like that. It's a very cheap dish to make. It comes together very quick. So it's great for families as a weekday dinner dish. The quantities of each vegetable, of course, may vary, but depending on your own preference. This is what a celeriac looks when you cross cut it. You can see that there's a lot of these little nooks here that collect dirt. So don't worry about those, just cut them away. It is a pretty strong flavored vegetable anyway, so you don't necessarily need a whole lot of it to give that flavor. My vegetables have been prepped, so let me just dice them quickly. The rutabaga is probably one of the most common root vegetables besides potato in Finnish cooking. And when cooked, it becomes this very sweet vegetable. It's a lower carb substitute for potato. And that's why I'm actually only using 2 potatoes here, just so that the dish isn't quite that carb heavy. And like I said, I'm going to leave the potatoes a little bit bigger pieces than the other vegetables. Okay, so we'll turn on the heat. And we're going to start browning our meat. We'll add a little bit of salt. We'll add a little bit of pepper. You can actually hear when the water has pretty much evaporated and meat is starting to brown more. So that's how we know that we are almost there. Just a little bit longer. You don't want to leave the meat looking gray like this. If you wait just a little bit longer, you'll get much better flavor. So a lot of people like to keep the pieces of beef very large when they're making the soup, and that's completely up to you. If you mix this in the beginning a lot, then they will break down and you'll get more of that crusty texture. But if you like to keep them more meaty, larger pieces, by all means, don't mix it at this point and they will stay in larger pieces. I'm going to add my onions here just on the top. I'm not going to mix them in quite yet because I'm still waiting for the beef to cook a little bit more, brown a little bit more on the bottom. And I'm also going to start adding my other root vegetables in here so they can start cooking as well. My pot is a little bit on the small side, so I'm just going to make sure I don't put too many in here. I'm also going to add my beef bouillon. And a couple of bay leaves. And of course some allspice. A couple of allspice berries. Okay, so now I'm going to add water. And my potatoes. So I'm going to add enough water that just everything gets covered pretty much. And now we're going to let this simmer for maybe about 10-15 minutes until the potatoes are done pretty much. And let's let it simmer and not really come to a hard boil. Now let's try the potatoes. They are done. Let's taste the soup for salt. No need, we're good. Some people may prefer more potatoes. Some like more of the broth itself. When you've ladled a bowl out of this, you could of course add more water to this to make the soup last longer. We'll just garnish this with some parsley flakes. If you have fresh curly parsley, you could use that as well. I just have dried parsley. And of course, we must not forget some rye bread, preferably freshly baked. And here we go. Finnish hamburger soup. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Finish Your Plate.